Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to Sip&Talk, everyone.
Hello again.
You know, I really thought the whole China-Japan drama might have cooled down a bit, but apparently not.
Not even a little bit. If anything, the temperature's just going up. It feels like the entire situation around Taiwan just took, 5 giant steps closer to the volcano's edge.
It really does. And the starting point for this latest round was that one single sentence from Japanese Prime Minister Takashi Sane. He said that if China moved on Taiwan, it would be a... What was the exact phrase?
Survival-threatening situation for Japan.
That's the one! And wow, that phrase landed like a punch to the gut in Beijing.
Oh, immediately. The reaction wasn't just, a standard diplomatic protest. It was an explosion. They summoned the Japanese ambassador, demanded an apology, and basically added, "You'll regret this."
And it wasn't just the diplomatic protest, was it? The language they used, it was extreme.
It was completely over the top. The official state media, the diplomats... They were using phrases you just don't hear in international relations. Things like threatening to smash their heads or turn all of Japan into a sea of fire.
Yeah, thanks to the great translation movement online, we know they really said that stuff. It's not just internet trolls, it's coming from official channels.
Exactly, and they backed it up with joint military drills, basically sending a very clear message. We're not just talking, we are practicing.
But here's the wildest part for me. Japan never actually apologized. Right? They stood their ground.
Never. Not once.
And yet, if you were only reading the news inside China, you'd think they did. The propaganda machine was constantly pushing this narrative that, Japan is softening its stance, or Japan knows it messed up.
It's a total information war tactic. It's purely for domestic consumption, to make it look like Beijing's pressure tactics are working.
So today, we really want to dig into that. Why is Japan suddenly the key player in the Taiwan storm? Why is Beijing so scared of Tokyo?
We've kind of broken it down into a few key questions we want to explore. First, why is Japan getting so much tougher now? Is Taiwan really a survival crisis for them?
Right. And second, why do so many military think tanks say that if Japan gets involved in a Taiwan war, China just can't win? And on the flip side, why do you see this anti-US, anti-Japan sentiment inside Taiwan when they're the most critical allies?
And third, we need to look at China's coercion tactics. Are they just posturing, or are they serious? And why do their actions keep backfiring so spectacularly?
And fourth, what's the economic fallout? How is all this speeding up the de-risking or, de-Sinicization of supply chains?
And then there's the fifth point, which is just fascinating. It's this socio-political bug, the phenomenon of Chinese tourists who, love to visit and shop in Japan, but also seem to have to publicly hate it at the same time.
Oh yeah, we're definitely getting into that. And finally, number 6, what does the Japanese public actually think? And I'll spoil this one a little for you.
Go for it.
The numbers are not friendly to Beijing. Nearly 90% of Japanese people have an unfavorable view of China. 60% support more defense spending because of the threat.
And the big one.
Almost half, nearly 50% support Japan getting militarily involved if China invades Taiwan. So Beijing isn't just angry at one politician, they're angry at the entire direction the Japanese public is moving.
Okay, let's get into it. This is Eye of the Taiwan Storm. Why Japan is Beijing's biggest strategic fear?
Okay, so let's start with that legal bombshell of a phrase, survival-threatening situation. For those of us who don't follow Japanese security law every day, why is that so much more than just, tough talk?
Because it's a legal key. That phrase unlocks a door in Japanese policy that has been bolted shut for almost 80 years. The entire Japanese military, the Self-Defense Force, or JSDF, has operated under Article 9 of their post-war constitution.
That's the famous peace constitution, right? The one that says they renounce war?
Exactly. It basically restricts their military to a purely defensive role. They can't maintain forces for aggression. So historically, the JSDF could really only fight if someone was, physically attacking Japanese soil.
So they're on defense, waiting for the first punch to land on them.
Precisely. But this survival-threatening situation designation, which they actually put into law back in 2015, changes everything. It legally allows the JSDF to use what's called collective self-defense.
Okay, so what does that mean in plain English?
It means they can use military force even if Japan itself isn't directly attacked. The condition is that a close ally, like the United States, is attacked, and the fallout from that attack fundamentally threatens Japan's own existence. In this context, an attack on Taiwan is being defined as that trigger.
So it flips a switch. Japan goes from being a static defender of its own islands to a potential active player in a war next door.
It's a seismic shift. And it's not based on ideology or, a feeling of friendship with Taiwan. It's based on cold, hard, strategic national interest.
Which brings us to the map. Why is Taiwan so critical to Japan's actual physical survival?
You just have to look at where it is. Taiwan sits right next to Japan's southwestern islands, like Okinawa, which is where you have all those critical U.S. military bases. But even more importantly, Taiwan is the gatekeeper.
The gatekeeper to what?
To Japan's economic lifelines. Their sea lanes of communication, or SLCs. You have to remember, Japan is an island. It has almost no natural resources of its own.
So everything comes in on a ship. Food, oil, gas, raw materials for all their factories. Everything.
Everything. And those shipping routes from the Middle East, from Southeast Asia, all have to pass through the waters around Taiwan to get to Japan's main ports.
So if China controlled Taiwan,
they could effectively put a chokehold on Japan's entire economy anytime they wanted. The East China Sea basically becomes a Chinese-controlled lake. They could impose a blockade or just threaten to force political concessions. They could literally asphyxiate Japan's economy without firing a single shot directly at Japan.
It's like your hostile neighbor buying the only road that leads to your house.
That's a perfect analogy. The loss of Taiwan means the first island chain, that sort of protective barrier for Japan, is broken. Their strategic depth is just gone. That's why the Prime Minister's statement resonated so powerfully with the public.
And let's talk about that public opinion, because it's the engine driving this whole thing. When Sunny said that, his approval rating didn't just stay steady, it shot up.
It soared to nearly 70%. That's an incredible amount of political capital.
Wow.
And that public support is everything. It gives the government the political cover they need to push for changes to their defense posture, things that have been stalled for decades because of the pacifist sentiment. But when the public feels an existential threat, they rally.
And the feeling about China is, well, it's pretty clear. You said 90% hold an unfavorable view.
Yeah, 90%. Just think about that number. It's one of the highest unfavorable ratings for China in any major country in the world. It shows that decades of economic partnership have completely failed to build any real trust.
So when the Japanese government stands up to Beijing, they're not spending political capital, they're actually gaining it.
They are, and you see that sentiment translating directly into policy support. Over 60% of the Japanese public now supports increasing military spending. For a country that has been so famously frugal with its defense budget, that's a huge psychological shift.
But the number that really blew me away was the one about intervention.
Right. Nearly half the country, 48.8%, supports the JSDF getting militarily involved if China invades Taiwan.
Almost 1 out of every 2 people in Japan is mentally prepared for their country to go to war over Taiwan.
That number alone tells you how much the strategic thinking has changed. Beijing's actions aren't just annoying the government in Tokyo, they're convincing the average Japanese person that they need to be ready to fight.
Which leads to this weird paradox. You have 90% who don't like China, almost 50% willing to fight, and yet over 70% still say the relationship is important. How do you square that circle?
It's a rational downgrading of the relationship. It's still important because, China is their biggest trading partner. You can't just flip a switch and turn that off overnight.
Right.
But the nature of that importance has changed. It's no longer seen as this vital economic engine that has to be protected at all costs.
So it's gone from a top priority to more of a necessary evil.
I'd say more of a necessary but dangerous trade partner. They realize that the economic benefits are now outweighed by the massive security risks. So they're choosing security first, even if it means taking a hit economically in the short term. That shift, prioritizing political risk over economic opportunity, is the biggest change in Japanese thinking in decades.
Okay, so Japan is putting security first, and Beijing sees this happening, and naturally they respond with extreme threats. Let's break down that rhetoric. Is it just, the leadership venting?
It looks like venting, but it's actually far more strategic than it is emotional. This isn't diplomacy. It's a military deterrence message being sent through a diplomatic channel.
And who's the real audience for that message?
The Japanese Self-Defense Force. And, by extension, the U.S. forces based in Japan. They're drawing a very, very bright red line.
They're basically saying, if you even think about getting involved, we're not just going to hit Taiwan. We're coming for you immediately and with everything we've got.
Exactly. The whole point is to scare Japan out of activating that collective self-defense mechanism we talked about. Because if Japan stays out, The U.S. loses its unsinkable aircraft carrier. It makes a U.S. intervention so much harder, maybe even impossible to sustain.
You know, some people look at that level of bluster and they say it actually reveals a kind of deep-seated insecurity. Like, if you were really that confident, you wouldn't need to shout so loud.
That's a really sharp insight. I mean, when a major power resorts to that kind of over-the-top emotional language, it often signals a real anxiety about variables they can't control.
And the U.S.-Japan alliance is the biggest variable they can't control.
It's the one they fear the most. So they're trying to bully and intimidate Japan out of that alliance structure because they fundamentally understand how powerful it is when it's activated. It's a projection of strength to cover an internal fear.
So beyond the military threats, what else are they doing? What are the non-military pressure tactics?
The main one is economic coercion. And they always do it in a way that's kind of subtle. Their big move was issuing a travel reminder.
Ah, the classic non-ban ban. It's not an official order, but everyone gets the message.
Exactly. It's deniable, but it's designed to put the squeeze on the Japanese economy. Tourism is a huge part of Japan's post-COVID recovery, and Chinese tourists are about a quarter of all their foreign visitors.
And they're the biggest spenders, right?
By far. So by turning off that tap, Beijing hopes to inflict enough economic pain that the powerful business lobbies in Japan will start pressuring the government to, soften its stance on Taiwan.
And you could see it in the markets, right?
Instantly. The stock prices for big retailers, cosmetic companies like Shiseido that depend on Chinese tourists, they all took a hit. Analysts figured a total loss of Chinese tourism could cost Japan something like 200 billion yen a month.
That's a lot of money. So the goal is clear.
Yeah.
Cause economic pain to get political change. But this is where the whole strategy seems to fall apart. This is the blowback.
This is where China's strategy just completely self-destructs. Every threat, every travel warning, every crude piece of rhetoric just proves Japan's point. It solidifies the public's belief that Beijing is an unpredictable, hostile, existential threat.
So their pressure is actually achieving the exact opposite of what they want.
It's catalytic. It's accelerating Japan's move towards strategic autonomy and a stronger military, the very thing they're trying to stop.
They are literally handing the pro-defense hawks in Japan their best political arguments on a silver platter.
Yes. That's 70% approval rating for the prime minister. The 60% support for more defense spending, that's a direct result of Beijing's overreaction. They are providing their opponent with all the political ammunition they need.
And this really shines a light on what you called policy confusion in Beijing. It seems like they're trying to do two opposite things at once.
It's an internal conflict that's paralyzing them. On one hand, the state needs the money from trade and tourism with Japan. On the other hand, its political legitimacy at home is built on stirring up this intense anti-Japan nationalism.
You can't tell your people to hate Japan on Monday and then expect them to go spend all their money there on Tuesday.
Exactly. And that unpredictability, that volatility, that's what terrifies global businesses. The consensus is shifting. The political risk of being deeply invested in China is now starting to outweigh the economic reward.
And that's speeding up this whole de-Sinicization of supply chains.
Massively. And it's moving way beyond just computer chips.
Can you give us a good example of that? Like outside of the tech world?
The auto industry is a perfect one. You have major companies like Tesla and GM who are actively telling their thousands of suppliers, you need to get Chinese-made parts out of the cars we build and sell in the U.S.
And this is before they're being legally forced to do it.
Yes, it's a preemptive move. They're hedging against the future. They're looking at a potential Taiwan crisis and realizing that overnight, 20% of their car parts could become illegal or politically toxic because of sanctions. That would shut down their entire production line.
So they're willing to pay more now to move production to, say, Mexico or Vietnam, just to avoid that massive risk down the road.
Exactly. The lesson Beijing is accidentally teaching the world is that if you want a stable business, you need to find an alternative to China.
Okay, let's pivot to the military side of things, the sharp end of the stick. Why do so many serious analysts, from think tanks like CSIS or RAND, all seem to agree that Japan's involvement is the single biggest deciding factor in a Taiwan war?
Right, because you'd think it would all be about the U.S. Navy and Air Force.
Yeah.
Why is Japan the linchpin? Geography is strategy. The U.S. can have the most powerful Navy in the world, but the Pacific is a very, very big ocean. The distances for resupply, for maintenance, for a rapid response. They're almost impossible without bases close to the fight.
And Japan, especially Okinawa, is right there, the unsinkable aircraft carrier.
That's what it is. It gives the U.S. proximity, speed, and the logistical support it absolutely needs to sustain a fight. If you take away guaranteed access to those Japanese bases, China's chances of pulling off a quick invasion go way, way up.
So if that foundation cracks, the U.S. response is delayed by days. And in a short, sharp fight, days could be everything.
It could be the difference between success and failure. But it's not just about the bases. It's about what the Japanese military itself brings to the table. The JSDF is world-class in a few key areas that are perfect for defeating China's invasion strategy.
Okay, like what specifically?
Their anti-submarine warfare, or ASW, is probably some of the best in the world, maybe even better than China's. And in an invasion, the Chinese Navy would be relying heavily on its submarines to protect its amphibious ships.
So Japan can hunt those subs and clear the way for Allied ships.
Mm-hmm. They protect the supply lines, and then you have their advanced missile defense systems on their destroyers. And the biggest geographic advantage of all,
the Miyako Strait.
The Miyako Strait. It's this narrow waterway that the Chinese Navy has to pass through to get from the mainland out into the Pacific, or to flank Taiwan from the east. The JSDF has the ability to effectively block that strait with land-based anti-ship missiles and their own naval forces.
So if Japan shuts that strait down, they're basically cutting the supply line for the invasion force before it can even get fully deployed.
It's like putting a cork in their main bottle.
Yeah.
It makes a quick victory almost impossible.
Yeah.
And the war games all show this. When the U.S., Japan, and Taiwan fight together, they almost always successfully defend Taiwan. But the cost is staggering.
We have to talk about that. What do the projections say about the cost of winning?
They're really sobering. The alliance would win, but you're talking about losing multiple U.S. aircraft carriers, dozens of ships, hundreds of planes. The human toll would be horrific.
And for China?
For China. In a failed invasion, they're projected to lose something like 80% of their amphibious forces and the core of their navy.
80%? That would basically wipe out their ability to project power at sea for a decade or more?
It should be the ultimate deterrent. The risk isn't just failing to take Taiwan, it's the complete destruction of their naval ambitions for a generation.
Okay, so that's the military battlefield. Let's switch to the cognitive one. Because we see these narratives inside Taiwan that seem so counterintuitive, this anti-US or anti-Japan sentiment. Why does that get any traction at all?
That is a sign of very effective, very targeted cognitive warfare from Beijing. They find genuine, real-life disagreements or historical grievances, and they pour gasoline on them to serve their main goal.
And what's that main goal?
To erode Taiwan's will to fight from the inside out.
So what are some of those specific arguments they use?
Against the U.S., it's always, America is just using you as a pawn, or they're forcing you to buy their expensive old weapons. And the biggest fear of all, they'll abandon you when things get tough.
And against Japan?
It's usually about historical baggage from World War II, or more current stuff like disputes over fishing rights, or the debate over Japan releasing treated nuclear water.
So they take these issues, which might have some truth to them, but they blow them up to seem more important than the actual existential threat from China.
That is the core of the manipulation. They want to create a sense of nihilism, a feeling in Taiwan that all allies are untrustworthy and self-serving, so what's the point of relying on them?
And if you believe that no one is coming to help you, then fighting back seems pointless.
Exactly. The only logical conclusion then is to give in to reconcile with Beijing, hopefully without a shot being fired. These narratives deliberately ignore the giant strategic reason why the U.S. and Japan have to defend Taiwan to protect their own interests in the first island chain. It's a very clear sign of successful information warfare.
Okay, let's shift gears to something a little more bizarre, the tourist paradox. You have millions of Chinese tourists. They are Japan's biggest group of foreign spenders, pouring billions into the economy, while at the same time maintaining this very loud, very public, state-approved anti-Japanese sentiment. How does that even work?
It is the ultimate example of cognitive dissonance, and it shows a real crack in Beijing's ideological control. They're stuck managing this massive tension between the official party line, which is, you must hate Japan for historical reasons, and the reality of their citizens' desires, which is, I can't resist Japan's high-quality stuff in clean, safe society.
Right. They love the products, the politeness, the efficiency, the food, but they have to hate the country it comes from.
And it goes deeper than just shopping. Psychologically, it's tied to this idea of the modernity chase. Japan was the first country in Asia to successfully modernize and compete with the West. For many in China, it's still the gold standard for what a modern Asian society looks like.
So when they go to Japan and buy things, it's kind of like a subconscious acknowledgement of that success.
Exactly. But admitting that you admire your historical rival's success is an ideological crime. It betrays the whole patriotic narrative they've been taught since kindergarten. So they have to mask that admiration with public displays of aggression.
That tension must be exhausting, so how do they resolve it? How do they make themselves feel better about it?
They perform what's called a spiritual victory. It's a psychological trick to square the circle. Since they can't criticize their own government's shortcomings, they find a safe target for their aggression to prove their own superiority.
Can you give us some examples of what that performance looks like in real life?
Yeah, you see it a lot on social media, which has become a platform for what you could call nationalism monetization. A tourist might, for example, deliberately be loud in a quiet Japanese temple or on a train.
Right.
And then they'll film themselves doing it and post it online, saying they're showing the free spirit of China versus the rigid conformity of Japan.
Even though that order and quiet is probably one of the reasons they wanted to visit in the first place.
It's the ultimate paradox. Or another common one is to buy a very expensive Japanese product, like a camera or a watch, and then film a review, finding some tiny flaw and declaring that the Chinese version is actually better now.
The point isn't to actually convince anyone. The point is to make themselves feel morally superior.
That's it. It allows them to say, I have consumed your superior material goods, which proves my wealth and modernity, but I have retained my ideological superiority by finding fault with you. It's a safe way to get patriotic brownie points online.
It's a really cheap and easy way to feel both modern and patriotic at the same time.
Yeah.
But as we said earlier, this whole policy of stoking hatred while needing trade, it's starting to have real economic consequences for Beijing.
Absolutely. That sociopolitical bug is starting to cost them dearly.
So we've laid out how this geopolitical tension is shaking up global supply chains. But let's connect it really quickly to the broader global financial world, which is flashing its own warning signs.
Right, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. While Asia is heating up, the global markets are under a lot of stress. Take the tech sector. Even with China's economy slowing down, the profit forecasts for their AI companies are still huge, something like 37% growth.
That's a massive number. But their companies are often valued lower than equivalent U.S. tech firms. Why the gap?
It's all about political risk. Investors are scared of what they call data sovereignty. They know the Chinese government can change the rules overnight, force companies to share data, or get them cut off from Western technology because of sanctions. So you have this high growth potential, but it comes with a huge political risk discount.
And shifting to the broader market, some big names are sounding the alarm, saying things feel a little bit like they did before the 2008 crash.
Yeah, you have guys like Jeff Gundlach saying the U.S. stock market is in one of the most unhealthy states he's ever seen. And he's pointing his finger at one specific area where he thinks the next crisis could come from.
And that is?
The world of private credit. It's this massive, mostly unregulated market that has exploded since 2008. It's basically private funds making high-risk, high-interest junk loans directly to companies that can't get money from regular banks.
So it's like subprime mortgages, but for corporations. And it's all happening in the shadows, outside of the normal banking system.
That's the exact parallel he's drawing. It's grown into a multi-trillion-dollar market, and it's so opaque that no one really knows how much risk is baked in. If there's a downturn and these companies start defaulting, it could cause a chain reaction that spills into the whole financial system.
An invisible, unregulated time bomb.
That's the fear.
And before we wrap, there was a quick political side note in our research about a pretty interesting move related to the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Yeah, that was a surprise. President Trump suddenly encouraging House Republicans to support the full release of the files.
Which is a total reversal, right? So what's the thinking there?
Most analysts see it as a classic bit of political four-dimensional chess. The calculation is that he's confident there's nothing in there that will hurt him, so he can position himself as a champion of radical transparency.
So he gets the head of the story and turns it into a political win.
Exactly. By pushing for the release, he takes away any criticism and puts the spotlight on anyone else who might be named. It's a very shrewd tactical distraction, whatever ends up being in those files.
All right, let's bring this all home. The big takeaway here is that Japan is not a silent partner anymore. Prime Minister Sanai's statement was a huge strategic shift, and Beijing's aggressive response is just proving to be completely self-defeating.
Their coercion is actually solidifying the U.S.-Japan-Taiwan security alliance. It's giving the Japanese government the political will it needs to finally push forward with its own defense buildup. Beijing's greatest fear is a fully remilitarized Japan, and their own actions are making that a reality.
And that brings us to our final thought for you to chew on. The stability of the entire region might now rest on this incredibly weird and delicate balance. The balance between Chinese consumer demand, which needs Japanese products, and Chinese nationalistic rage, which the state needs to fuel for its own legitimacy.
And the question is, can Beijing keep those two things in separate boxes forever? Or will that internal policy confusion we talk about eventually cause them to poison the well with one of their most important economic partners, destroying their own strategy in the process?
It's an ideological tightrope walk over an economic canyon, something to keep a very close eye on.
And we do want to be very clear. Our entire discussion today is based on objective analysis of geopolitical strategy and market data. We're not criticizing or discriminating against any country or any group of people. We're just inviting you to think independently about what's happening.
We love getting to do these Sip and Talks with you. Please make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your audio so you never miss one.
And definitely check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel. It's called Mickytolife. Lots of fun travel vlogs and memes over there.
He's great. All right, until next time.
We'll see you then. Bye for now.